It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday evening in Atlanta. The streets were calm, the sky fading into the deep orange of dusk. But inside one downtown hotel room, something terrible had just happened. At exactly 9:42 p.m., emergency dispatch received a call from a panicked man. His voice was shaking as he begged for help, saying, "She's not breathing. Please, I didn't mean to." It was an accident. When officers arrived at room 217, they were met with a scene no one expected. A young woman lay lifeless on the floor.
Sir, put your hands where I can see him.
Kneeling and trembling was a man with
What is your name, sir?
and shock in his eyes. His name was Pastor Daniel Brooks, a married father of two, a respected community leader, a man of faith and authority, now standing over the body of a woman from his own church. What happened in that room that night would expose a life built on lies, betray the trust of hundreds, and end with a single question that still divides people today. How could a man of God commit such a sin? But the truth was even darker than it first appeared. Because hidden somewhere in that room, investigators found a clue that would unravel everything. A cell phone that was still recording. On that phone was evidence of what truly happened between Pastor Brooks and the woman he called his spiritual daughter. To understand how it all led to this, we must go back, before the scandal, before the blood, before the lie that destroyed them both. Daniel Brooks was a name many respected. He wasn't just another preacher. He was the kind who spoke with conviction, the kind people trusted with their secrets, their marriages, their faith. His sermons filled the church every Sunday. Families looked up to him. His wife Monica was admired for her grace and loyalty. Together they seemed unbreakable, the picture of righteousness. But behind that image was a growing conflict that no sermon could hide. 2 years before the murder, Daniel met a woman named Alicia Green. She was 29 years old, a newly divorced choir member looking for spiritual guidance and a new start. She joined his church seeking healing and direction. Daniel offered to counsel her personally. At first, their meetings were innocent, discussions about faith, forgiveness, and moving on from pain. But slowly, the line between pastor and parishioner began to blur. He saw her more often. Their meetings became longer. Words of comfort became something else, something dangerous. Alicia trusted him. He told her she was special, that God had brought her into his life for a reason, but the reason, it seemed, had nothing to do with God. Soon, their meetings moved from the church office to private locations, hotels, empty homes, anywhere they could hide from the world that trusted them. For a long time, they both managed to keep it secret. But secrets never stay buried. Members of the church began to whisper. Alicia's close friends noticed changes in her behavior, sudden trips, missed rehearsals, nervous glances whenever Pastor Brooks walked into the room. And then, one evening, someone saw his car parked outside Alicia's apartment. It wasn't the first time. When rumors reached his wife, Monica, Daniel denied everything. He called the accusations lies from jealous people trying to destroy his ministry. He reminded his followers that even Jesus was falsely accused. And for a while, people believed him. But Alicia's heart was breaking. The man who promised her a future suddenly avoided her calls. He became distant, cold, and angry. She began to realize she wasn't a partner in his life. She was a secret in his shame. She confided in a friend, saying, "He told me he loves me, but he'll never leave her. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being the mistake." Those words would mark the beginning of the end, because Alicia decided she would no longer be silenced. She told her friend that she planned to record their next meeting, not to hurt him, but to finally have proof of the truth, proof that the man everyone worshipped was living a lie. She believed the recording would set her free, but what she didn't know was that the moment she pressed record, she had already sealed her fate. The following Sunday, Pastor Brooks stood before his congregation, preaching about sin and forgiveness. He told them, "It's not what we do in public that condemns us, it's what we hide in secret." From her seat in the third row, Alicia watched him closely. The same man who spoke of truth had spent 2 years lying to everyone who believed in him. That night, she sent her final message to her friend. She wrote, "Next time we meet, I'll have proof." That was the night she met him at the hotel. That was the night she pressed record. And that was the night everything changed. When investigators found her body, they assumed it was another tragic domestic incident. But once they played the recording, the truth could no longer be denied. It was not an accident. It was not a sudden collapse. It was murder, born from fear, lust, and a desperate attempt to protect a lie. The man once trusted to lead others to salvation had destroyed his own soul. She thought the truth would set her free. But for Pastor Daniel Brooks, the truth was something worth killing for. When news of the murder broke, the city could hardly believe it. Pastor Daniel Brooks, a man trusted by hundreds, a man whose words had inspired families, healed broken homes, and guided lost souls, was now in police custody, accused of killing one of his own church members. To many, it didn't make sense. How could the same man who preached love and forgiveness take a life? But to those who had known Daniel closely, the signs had been there all along. Quiet, subtle, and carefully hidden beneath charm and confidence. This was not the story of a single mistake. This was the story of a man who lived 2 lives. In his early years, Daniel Brooks was the kind of preacher people admired instantly. He had a way of speaking that drew crowds, calm, authoritative, full of conviction. He started small, leading midweek prayer meetings in a rented hall. Within a few years, his congregation grew from a handful of people to hundreds. His sermons were broadcast on local radio. Donations poured in. He became the symbol of success, a man who had built his church from the ground up. At home, his wife Monica and their 2 children were often seen smiling beside him. Family photos filled his social media pages, matching outfits on Sundays, dinner celebrations, family vacations. To the public, Daniel was the perfect example of faith and discipline. But behind the scenes, Daniel's confidence had begun to feed something else: pride. And pride, like temptation, always demands more. He began to see himself as untouchable, not just a servant of God, but a man above reproach. Outside the pulpit, Daniel lived a life no one in his congregation could imagine. Late-night meetings with young women from the church, private counseling sessions that went far beyond prayer. He used his authority to command trust, and sometimes to take advantage of it. Alicia Green was not the first woman who found herself drawn to him, but she was the one that changed everything. It started with sympathy. She had gone through a painful divorce and felt unwanted, unseen, and unloved. Daniel listened. He told her that God still had plans for her life. He prayed with her, comforted her, and slowly he became the man she leaned on for everything. To Alicia, she was her protector. To Daniel, she was his escape. An escape from expectation, from judgment, from the pressures of being perfect. But every escape has a cost. The first cracks in Daniel's image appeared when one of the church ushers reported seeing him and Alicia leaving a late-night prayer session together. When confronted by his assistant pastor, Daniel brushed it off. He said Alicia was going through a spiritual crisis and needed more attention. That explanation silenced the question, but not the doubt. Weeks later, Alicia was seen wearing a gold bracelet identical to one Monica, Daniel's wife, had worn before. It didn't take long for whispers to begin spreading. Monica noticed the distance too. Daniel stopped praying with the family. He came home late, claimed exhaustion, and began locking his phone. When she asked what was wrong, he simply said, "It's church work. You wouldn't understand." But she did understand. She just didn't want to believe it. Daniel and Alicia's relationship intensified. They met secretly in hotels under fake names. They texted constantly, sharing private messages that mixed scripture with desire. For Daniel, it was a dangerous thrill, a forbidden act hidden beneath his holy reputation. For Alicia, it was love. She believed that someday he would leave his wife and marry her. He told her, "God understands us. He knows this connection is special." It was the lie that kept her close, the lie that destroyed them both. As months passed, Alicia began to feel used. She realized that while Daniel asked her to hide, he continued preaching about purity and integrity. She started to pull away, but Daniel couldn't let her go. Control became the center of their relationship. Daniel would demand to know where she went, who she spoke to, and what she posted online. He accused her of being unfaithful whenever she tried to distance herself. One evening, Alicia's friend remembered her saying, "He doesn't want anyone else to have me, but he won't choose me either." That was the first time Alicia mentioned ending it for good. But Daniel's pride couldn't allow that. He had spent years crafting the image of a perfect man. If Alicia walked away and revealed the truth, everything would collapse. His marriage, his ministry, his reputation. To Daniel, ending the affair meant risking exposure. To Alicia, continuing it meant losing herself completely. They were trapped in a bond built on secrecy and fear. 3 weeks before the murder, Daniel delivered a sermon that now feels like a confession in disguise. He told his congregation, "Every man fights 2 battles, one the world can see and one that hides inside him. The devil does not come in horns and fire. He comes softly with what your heart desires most." People applauded. But the truth was that Daniel wasn't preaching to his followers. He was preaching to himself. That night, Alicia messaged him asking if he still loved her. His response was short. "Stop asking questions. You're making things complicated." 2 days later, she stopped coming to church. When Monica asked her why, Alicia said she needed space to heal. But she didn't tell anyone what she was planning. She had made up her mind to expose the truth, and she had the perfect way to do it. After Alicia's disappearance from service, some members grew suspicious. Others defended their pastor blindly, saying he was being attacked for doing God's work. In private, Daniel began to unravel. He was seen drinking alone in his car after evening prayer. His sermons became shorter, his temper sharper. The man who once inspired calm now carried the look of guilt in his eyes. Meanwhile, Alicia grew bolder. She told a close friend, "He's not who you think he is. I'm going to show everyone." Those words would become her prophecy. On the night before her death, Alicia prepared carefully. She charged her phone fully. She deleted unnecessary contacts. And she sent her best friend a final message that read, "Tomorrow it ends." The next day she met Daniel in the same hotel they had used before. He thought it was another secret meeting. She thought it was her chance to finally be free. But what neither of them knew was that the phone in her purse was already recording. It would capture the confrontation that ended her life and revealed the truth behind the man who preached salvation, but lived in sin. For years, Pastor Daniel Brooks preached that the wages of sin is death. He just never imagined those words would come true. Not in his church, not in his life, and not at his own hands. The night Alicia walked into that hotel, she believed she was reclaiming her power. Instead, she stepped into the final chapter of a story that began with faith and ended with betrayal. The double life Daniel had built was about to collapse, and when police discovered what really happened in room 217, the truth would shake not only his family, but his entire congregation. Because what the recording revealed next was darker than anyone imagined.
The secret between Pastor Daniel Brooks and Alicia Green had turned into something far more dangerous than either of them imagined. What began as desire was now fear. What began as comfort was now blackmail. Alicia had the proof she needed. A few messages, some photos, and now her plan to record their next encounter. She wasn't trying to destroy him, not at first. She wanted acknowledgement. She wanted closure. But Daniel, already cornered by guilt and paranoia, saw only one thing: a threat that could end his life, his marriage, and his ministry. On the night of October 15th, surveillance cameras captured Alicia entering the downtown hotel at 8:57 p.m. She was alone, wearing a beige jacket and carrying her purse. She smiled briefly at the front desk attendant, unaware that it would be the last time anyone saw her alive. Minutes later, Daniel arrived. He wore a dark cap, his collar up, face partly hidden. He didn't check in. He already had the key. Room 217. Inside that room, the tension was thick, almost visible. What was said in those first few minutes is only partly known. But what came after, the phone recording, filled in the rest. Detectives later described the audio as haunting. The clip began with laughter, nervous, uneasy laughter. Then Alicia's voice. "You said you love me, Daniel. I just want you to mean it. I just want people to know I wasn't a mistake." A pause. Then his reply, low and sharp. "Turn that off. Why are you recording?" Her tone changed. "Because you'll lie again. You lied to me, to her, to everyone. I need to protect myself." What followed was chaos. The sound of movement, raised voices, then a crash, then silence. When the recording stopped, so did her life. Investigators later confirmed that Alicia died from blunt force trauma to the head and strangulation. She fought back. There were signs of struggle. Overturned furniture, blood on the bedsheet, the lamp shattered against the wall. And the pastor, the man people called a vessel of God, was left in shock. He didn't call 911 immediately. He sat there for over an hour before finally picking up the phone, his voice trembling, claiming it was an accident. But the evidence told a different story. Police found his fingerprints everywhere. Her phone, hidden beneath the bed, was still recording when they arrived. That's how detectives knew the argument lasted almost 20 minutes before violence erupted. He said she attacked him. The audio said otherwise. He claimed she fell. The bruises told the truth. And while the world would soon learn about the murder, what most didn't know was what Daniel tried to do next. After killing her, he called his wife. He didn't tell her the truth. He told her he'd made a mistake and needed prayer. Monica had no idea that at that very moment her husband was sitting beside a lifeless body. She prayed for him over the phone, telling him, "Whatever it is, God will forgive you." He hung up, crying. Then finally, he called 911. When officers arrived, he was sitting on the floor, holding her hand, whispering words of apology that meant nothing anymore. But
I
even
swear to
in
God,
that
officer,
moment, Daniel
I didn't
didn't
touch her. She was
admit to murder.
just lying there when
He
I arrived.
insisted
Calm
it
down,
was an
Reverend.
accident
You're
during
saying you don't know what
intimacy,
happened?
a tragic moment of passion, as he later called it. To the public, it was unthinkable. A pastor? A man who preached about purity and family? The news spread fast. Within hours, the headlines filled social media feeds. Married pastor arrested after death of church member in hotel. Community in shock over pastor's secret affair and tragic end. Congregation members gathered outside the police station, some in tears, others in disbelief. Some refused to believe he could be capable of such evil. Others whispered that they had always suspected something was wrong. But one thing was clear. The mask had fallen. The man who preached about truth had been undone by a lie. The man who taught others to resist temptation had fallen deeper than anyone imagined. And the woman who wanted the world to know the truth never got the chance to tell it herself. Detectives searched Daniel's home that same week. What they found inside his study shocked even the most seasoned officers. Dozens of handwritten notes and private messages between him and Alicia. They spoke of love, fear, and threats. In one message, Alicia wrote, "If you keep lying, I'll tell her everything." In another, Daniel replied, "If you destroy me, you destroy yourself." Those weren't just words. They were warnings. Warnings of a love turned fatal. At the center of it all was one truth. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a crime of panic. Daniel Brooks didn't plan to kill her that night. But when she reached for the phone, when she told him she had proof, his perfect life flashed before him. The church, the pulpit, his wife, his children. In that instant, the man of God became the man of fear. And fear, more than anything, led him to sin beyond redemption. As detectives pieced together the evidence, one chilling question lingered in everyone's mind. If Alicia hadn't recorded that night, would she still be alive?
The morning after the murder, Atlanta woke to a story that would shake the entire community. A beloved pastor, one who had preached against sin, temptation, and moral decay, was now in handcuffs, accused of killing the woman he once called his spiritual daughter. Outside the police station, reporters crowded the entrance. Cameras flashed as officers escorted Pastor Daniel Brooks into custody. His head was bowed low, lips moving in silent prayer. For years, people had looked up to him. Now, the same people stood behind barricades, staring in disbelief as their shepherd was led away like a criminal. Inside the interrogation room, detectives placed a recorder on the table. Daniel sat quietly, hands clasped, his wedding ring still on his finger. When they asked what happened, his first words were, "I didn't mean for it to go that far." He insisted that Alicia's death was accidental, that during intimacy, things got out of control. But when detectives mentioned the recording on her phone, his face changed. The mask of calm cracked. His voice trembled. He whispered, "You heard it?" They had, and it told them everything. The investigator leaned forward and asked one question. "Pastor Brooks, were you afraid she would expose you?" He looked down, eyes wet, and nodded. Then he said something that chilled the entire room. "I couldn't let her destroy everything, not after all I built." It was the closest thing to a confession he ever gave. By that afternoon, he was charged with second-degree murder. But as the legal system prepared its case, another storm began to brew outside the courtroom walls, in the church he once led. At Living Grace Ministries, where Daniel Brooks had preached every Sunday for almost 10 years, members gathered in stunned silence. Some refused to believe the reports.
Others wept openly, calling it a test of faith. The church board held an emergency meeting. They decided to suspend all services until further notice. His portrait, once hanging proudly in the church lobby, was quietly taken down. And then there was his wife, Monica. For years, she had stood behind him through rumors, through whispers, through gossip. She believed in his innocence because she believed in his faith. But that morning, when detectives arrived at her home with a warrant, the truth finally reached her doorstep. They showed her the evidence, the messages, the photos, the timeline, and when they told her about the recording, she couldn't breathe. For hours, she sat on the couch, staring into nothing. The man she had shared a bed with had not only betrayed her, he had killed another woman to keep that betrayal hidden. Friends say she whispered just 4 words, "God, not him too." While her husband sat behind bars, the church she once called home turned into a battlefield. Half the congregation defended him, claiming he was being framed by the devil. The other half demanded justice for Alicia, a young woman they once sang beside in the choir. Social media erupted with anger, confusion, and disgust. Clips of his old sermons resurfaced online, the ones where he condemned adultery and preached about purity. Now those same clips were being used to mock him. "Practice what you preach," one headline read. But the real damage wasn't online. It was in the hearts of those who had believed in him. People began questioning everything he ever said. How many other secrets had he hidden? How many lives had he fooled while standing behind the pulpit? For many, the scandal didn't just destroy a church, it shattered their faith. Meanwhile, in his jail cell, Pastor Brooks began writing letters to his wife, to his children, to the church board, each one filled with regret, scripture, and self-pity. He wrote that he was under spiritual attack, that Satan had used temptation to ruin his destiny. But what none of those letters said was the word sorry. Not once did he apologize to the woman whose life he ended. Not once did he mention Alicia's name. When detectives asked him why, he simply said, "Because I still can't believe she's gone." By the time the case reached the courtroom, the story had already turned into national news. The fall of Pastor Brooks became a symbol, a warning of what happens when power and temptation meet behind closed doors. Prosecutors called it a crime of ego. They said Daniel Brooks cared more about his reputation than the truth, that when faced with exposure, he chose violence over humility. His defense attorney tried to paint a different picture of a man trapped by lust, manipulated, and overwhelmed. But no argument could erase the recording, because in that one piece of audio, the world heard who he really was. And as his wife sat in the courtroom, tears streaming down her face, she finally understood that the man she loved was gone long before that night. He had built a kingdom on lies. He had preached salvation but delivered sin. And now as the truth spread beyond the walls of his church, one haunting question lingered for everyone who had ever followed him. How many more Daniel Brooks exist behind the pulpit, preaching redemption while hiding their own damnation?
By the time the trial of Pastor Daniel Brooks began, the story had spread far beyond Atlanta. It was no longer just a local tragedy. It had become a national conversation about hypocrisy, faith, and power. Outside the courthouse, protesters and church members stood side by side. Some held signs demanding justice for Alicia Green. Others prayed for mercy for their fallen pastor. But inside the courtroom, there was no more room for faith, only facts. The prosecution laid out its case with precision. They played the recording, the same one found on Alicia's phone. For nearly 20 minutes, the courtroom sat in absolute silence as her voice echoed through the speakers. Her pleas, his anger, the crash, the struggle.
And finally, the sound that ended her life. When the recording stopped, several jurors were in tears. Even the judge took a moment to collect himself. The defense tried to argue that it was a tragic accident, the result of a heated moment that got out of control. But the evidence told a different story, a story of fear, control, and desperation. The bruises on her neck, the shattered lamp, the blood on his shirt, and the chilling statement he made during interrogation. I couldn't let her destroy everything. Those words echoed through the courtroom like a confession carved in stone. Then came the testimony that broke the hearts of everyone watching. Monica Brooks, his wife. When she took the stand, she didn't defend him. She didn't accuse him either. She simply told the truth. She spoke of a man who had changed over the years, once humble, now proud, once gentle, now distant. She admitted that she had suspected the affair, but chose to pray instead of confront. And with tears in her eyes, she said, I thought God would fix what was broken. I never imagined it would end with death. Her words silenced the entire courtroom. The defense rested. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was clear. Guilty of second-degree murder. Pastor Daniel Brooks was sentenced to 35 years in prison with no possibility of parole for the first 20. As the judge read the sentence, Daniel stared straight ahead, emotionless. His eyes didn't search for his wife. He didn't look at Alicia's family. It was as if he had already left the world around him. But when the guards moved to take him away, he finally whispered something. Words that only the microphone caught. Tell them I was weak. And perhaps that was the truest thing he ever said. After the verdict, Alicia's mother spoke to the press. Her voice was calm but heavy with pain. She said, he took my daughter's life, but he didn't take her truth. The truth is what brought him down. Those words would become the closing line of every headline, every documentary, every discussion about the case. As weeks passed, Living Grace Ministries permanently shut its doors. The once crowded sanctuary now stood empty. Dust on the pulpit, sunlight falling through cracked stained glass. The sermons that once filled hearts with hope had been replaced by silence. And in that silence, the story of Pastor Daniel Brooks lived on, as both a warning and a lesson. He preached salvation to others, but never sought redemption for himself. He taught about resisting sin, but never confronted his own. And in the end, it wasn't temptation that destroyed him, it was pride. This was never just a story about a pastor and his lover. It was a story about power misused, trust broken, and the cost of living a double life. Alicia Green was not a mistake. She was not a secret. She was a woman who believed in love and paid the ultimate price for someone else's lies. And as for Daniel Brooks, he became the very warning he once preached about. Behind every scandal, behind every fall from grace, lies a truth people try to hide. But as this story proves, the truth always finds a way out. Some stories shake a community. Others expose the darkness hidden behind respectability. This one did both. And while justice may have been served, the scars it left behind still remind us evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it stands in the pulpit. If you were moved by this story, subscribe to Crime Vault for more true stories that reveal the lies people kill to protect. Because in every headline, there's a heartbeat that stopped and a truth that refused to die.